Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In a quiet corner of New York State lies a city that seems, at first glance, entirely ordinary. But beneath its surface, Elmira reveals something far more unsettling, a place where light and darkness intertwine, where spirituality and violence mirror each other in uncanny ways. Guiding us through this journey is Paolo Franceschetti, who uncovers a hidden network of connections linking Elmira to Florence, to ancient spiritual traditions, and to some of the most disturbing mysteries of our time. From the writings of Mark Twain to the channeled voice of Seth, from mystical teachings to unsolved crimes, a pattern begins to emerge, one that challenges our understanding of reality, divinity, and the forces that shape human history. Paolo Franceschetti introduces Elmira as a small city in the state of New York, with roughly 28,000 inhabitants, reached by roads winding through a strikingly beautiful mountain landscape, quintessentially American. The city cannot be called quiet. A series of murders and criminal events mark it with a crime rate above the national average. And yet Elmira carries within its very name a profound symbolic dimension. The name lends itself to a symbolic reading, Elmira, where El in Hebrew means God and Mira in Latin means admire or wonder at. Elmira would thus be, etymologically, the city that admires the divine. This reading, however, coexists with its opposite. During the American Civil War, Elmira hosts a notoriously brutal Confederate prison camp, where the dead, claimed by cold and hunger, are so numerous that the city becomes known as Elmira, the city of hell. The name thus carries two polarities within itself. It admires God, yet it harbors hell. Franceschetti sees in this duality a fundamental interpretive key, one that returns repeatedly throughout his analysis of the city. Elmira is known in America for two main things. The first is being the city where Mark Twain lived and wrote his major works. The celebrated author of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer works here in an octagonal writing studio, still preserved and open to visitors today, on the campus of Elmira College. His entire family rests in the city's cemetery. What strikes Franceschetti is a further connection between Elmira and Florence. Mark Twain spends a significant period of his life in Florence, convinced that artistic culture is not adequately taught in the United States. He returns to Italy and takes up residence in Setignano, a hamlet within the municipality of Florence, and later returns for an even longer stay. Setignano is the very place where the meetings of the Florence 77 Circle are held, and the name itself echoes that of Roberto Seti, a central figure in what follows. The connection between Elmira and Florence thus becomes doubly layered, literary and spiritual. A brief note for readers unfamiliar with this reference. The Florence 77 Circle was a spiritual group active from the 1940s through the 1980s, in which a medium named Roberto Seti channeled a range of non-physical entities. The sessions were recorded and later transcribed and published, producing what many in Italian esoteric circles regard as the most complete and philosophically rigorous body of spiritual teaching in the Western tradition. The number 77 refers to the year 1977, when the circle's activity reached a particular intensity. The second characteristic for which Elmira is known is that of being considered the soaring capital of America. Thanks to particularly favorable thermal currents, enthusiasts from across the country come here to fly. The glider collection housed at the National Soaring Museum is the most significant in the world, and anyone visiting the city can experience glider flight firsthand. The spiritual heart of the story of Elmira is Jane Roberts, who, though not born in the city, lives there and produces her entire body of work within it. Her books, Communications with Seth, Dialogues with Seth, works on the power of the psyche, the creation of reality, magic, the law of attraction, love, and Christ, cover essentially the same ground that will be at the center of the Florence 77 Circle's teachings. The entity that manifests through Jane Roberts calls itself Seth, spelled Set, in the Italian tradition Franceschetti writes from, and is, according to him, the true author of the books. The connection to Roberto Seti and the Florence 77 Circle is immediate. The surname Roberts contains the name Roberto. The entity's name Seth echoes the surname Seti. But the parallels do not stop there. Roberts' husband is named Robert, and the entity Seth does not address Jane by her own name. It calls her Rubert, a name she herself cannot understand but accepts as part of herself. Roberts' novels feature as their protagonist a figure called Oversoul 7, a number that recurs in the very name of the Florence 77 Circle. The third novel of the trilogy explains, in fictional form, what the second coming of Christ means, and does so with such clarity and simplicity that Franceschetti himself declares he only truly understood the Christ consciousness after reading Roberts' books. Both Jane Roberts and Roberto Seti die in 1984, born just 1 year apart, one in 1930, the other in 1931. Both die of illness, Roberto Seti of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Jane Roberts of cancer. Jane is the English feminine equivalent of Giovanni, John, which is the patron saint of Florence and the guiding saint of both the White Rosicrucian tradition and, unfortunately, the Black Rosicrucian tradition as well. The Italian publisher of both, Roberts' books and the Florence 77 Circle's transcripts, is Giovanni Canonico of Edizioni Mediterranee. Giovanni, John, returns again as a unifying thread. One element that the sessions of Jane Roberts and those of Roberto Seti share is the place in which they occur, not a temple, not a sacred space, but an ordinary home. Roberto Seti lives at Via Anton Francesco Doni 35 in Florence, in a modest apartment building. Jane Roberts lives at 458 West Water Street, in a perfectly ordinary American house. In both cases, the sessions unfold amid the texture of daily life. People talk, eat, joke, drink. The divine manifests in the midst of the ordinary. Franceschetti emphasizes this point with force. The Florence 77 Circle is, in his view, the most important spiritual and magical production of the Western world. The most complete teachings, the most perfect in their logic, their rationality, and the depth of the concepts expressed. And yet they are given not in an ashram, not in a church, but in a living room. The implicit message is direct. The divine is everywhere, even in ordinary domestic things, even in daily life. And it can appear suddenly while one is doing something entirely mundane. It is only a question of perceiving it or not. Seth manifests suddenly to Roberts, who initially remains skeptical and shaken. Roberto Seti, by contrast, is calm and trusting from the very beginning, and the manifestation occurs when he is very young, around 17, at his parents' home, in the company of friends who know nothing of spirituality or the divine. Seti channels multiple entities: Sempis, Dolly, Francois, the Venetian master, the Oriental Master, Alan, and many others, among them Lily, a mischievous little girl who plays pranks. It is impossible to build a cult around a phenomenon so multiform and so domestic. Some of the dates on which the Florence 77 Circle holds its sessions coincide with those of Roberts's sessions. And in one particular session, some participants asked the entity Francois to comment on the relationship with other entities manifesting elsewhere, including a passing reference to Roberts. Francois replies that the Circle's entities, as they have stated many times before, to the point where it scarcely needs repeating, are the guides of humanity, and they appear everywhere, in different forms. In the same session, the participants raised the question of the Monster of Florence murders. Francois responds with clarity. Even the crimes are part of the divine plan, not only the manifestations such as those of the Circle. A note for readers unfamiliar with this case. The Monster of Florence is the name given to an unidentified serial killer, or, as Franceschetti argues, an organized group, responsible for a series of double murders in the Florentine countryside between the 1960s and 1980s. The case remains officially unsolved and is one of Italy's most debated criminal mysteries, with investigators and writers having long noted a possible connection to occult organizations. Franceschetti introduces here an interpretive framework that runs through his entire reflection. Where there is a great quantity of light, there is always a great quantity of darkness, and vice versa. White and black do not exclude each other. Both are part of the divine design. The years of maximum activity of the Florence 77 Circle, particularly with the arrival of Francois in 1981, followed by the dense years of 1982 and 1983, correspond to the years of highest concentration of the Monster of Florence murders. The crimes occur simultaneously with the sessions, during the same years in which Francois, in numerous meetings, summarizes the entire body of teaching accumulated over 37 years of the Circle. The connection between the Monster of Florence murders and the Black Rose Cross is, for Franceschetti, documented by a Dantesque symbolism evident in the details of the crimes. The first murder, that of Pasquale Gentilcore, already echoes the opening lines of Dante's Vita Nova. To every captive soul and gentle heart. The name Pasquale evokes Christ. The gentle heart is taken by the Black Rose. The investigator Michele Gittari, who led the official inquiry into the Monster of Florence cases, has written a series of novels, barely fictional in nature, in which the Black Rose and the Dantesque and Rosicrucian symbolism are continuously present. In the 1970s, in Elmira, a criminal named Francis Gigliotti is active. His surname evokes the Giglio, the lily, which is the symbol of the city of Florence and a symbol of the Rosicrucians. The reference is biblical. Verse 49 of the Song of Songs reads, "I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys." Gigliotti has a distinctive method. He disguises himself as a police officer to approach his victims. Franceschetti recalls that the lawyer Falasto, in connection with the Monster of Florence, had advanced the hypothesis that the killer presented himself as a police officer to gain the victim's trust, though the reality would prove more complex than a single impersonator. In the 1980s, a woman named Rose Swartwood Dyer is murdered in Elmira. Her name carries the rose within it, while Swartwood means dark wood or black wood, and dyer means one who dyes cloth, a dyer. The murder takes place at 324 Woodlawn Avenue. The word wood reappears both in the victim's surname and in the street name. The neighborhood is called Eathorne-Court, a name that resonates with the English word for hawthorn, a thorn flower belonging to the rose family. The symbolic picture that emerges is that of a rose in the dark wood dying within the white rose. The reference to the dyer evokes alchemy, the change of color, white stained by black. This creates yet another link with Florence, a city renowned throughout the Middle Ages for the art of dyeing cloth, one of its primary and most prestigious sources of wealth. The two killers are identified in part thanks to a psychic named Phil Jordan, whose surname evokes the Jordan River, where John the Baptist baptized Christ. The victim, Rose Swartwood Dyer, is stabbed 40 times, in addition to being bitten and subjected to other brutalities. The two perpetrators are very young, one 18, the other approximately 25. The official motive is attributed to robbery, but Franceschetti contests this reading. In a robbery, one does not stab the victim 40 times. 40 stab wounds indicate that the attacker or attackers had time, were not in a hurry. A crime of passion or impulse does not accommodate such systematicity, and the physical exhaustion imposed by the repeated action makes it implausible that a single individual acted alone. Moreover, the victim is 74 years old, and nothing suggests a crime of passion. The parallel with the Monster of Florence murders is explicit. One of the Florentine victims sustains 97 stab wounds, yet the official narrative long insists on a lone serial killer. In Elmira, Franceschetti argues, the same mechanism is at work. A scapegoat is identified and convicted, while the symbolism points to the action of an organization. The victim of duality, too, bears a significant name, John shape, John or Giovanni, the saint of both the white and black rose cross, establishing yet another link to Florence and to the Rosicrucian tradition. Franceschetti then broadens the perspective into a wider reflection on the way the divine manifests throughout history. He observes that the lives of the great initiates and spiritual figures of humanity show extraordinary synchronicities, which to a superficial observer might appear to be evidence of fabrication or invention. The lives of Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna share almost identical stages. At the birth of Krishna, the terrible King Kansa orders the slaughter of all children, just as Herod does in the Christian tradition. Jesus spends 40 days in the desert, tempted by Satan. Buddha spends 40 days beneath the Bodhi tree, tempted by the demon Mara with the very same temptations. The differences are contextual. In India, there is no desert, so we have a tree instead, but the stages are comparable with a synchronicity so striking that it has led some historians to doubt the historical reality of these figures, who are, in fact, historically attested. The explanation offered by both the Florence 77 Circle and Jane Roberts' teachings is the same. The Christ entity is the most important entity on earth, and it enters the body of Jesus, but also the body of Krishna and of Buddha. These are manifestations of the same entity across different times and places. Given this premise, it is natural that certain dynamics, certain movements, certain stages should be identical. The divine design always manifests through the same patterns, as the very parallelism between Elmira and Florence demonstrates. Wherever there is a great spiritual light, there is always a great dark force set against it. The difference from earlier ages is that both the Florence 77 Circle and Jane Roberts benefited from an extraordinary instrument unavailable in earlier times: the ability to record their sessions. For Krishna, Buddha, and Jesus, no audio documentation existed. For the Florence 77 Circle and for Roberts, recordings exist, and this makes it impossible to dispute the extraordinary phenomena that occurred within them, the miracles, the exceptional events. But the greatest miracle, Franceschetti concludes, remains the teachings themselves, the depth, the completeness, and the rationality with which a vision of the divine is returned to humanity, a vision broad enough to embrace both light and shadow, both Elmira and Florence. That's all for today. See you in the next episode of America's Esoteric History, here on Compelling Topics.
I went to